one and all, and listen to tales of excitement and adventure. Tales of daring heroes, savage monsters, and bards who just couldn't keep it in their pants. Tales of friendship, nobility, drunken foolishness, and unforgettable fun. These are tales of role-playing games, fair listeners, and this is Rollin' Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, Boneheads, and welcome back to Rollin' Bones with Ryan Howard, your RPG treasure trove. I am your host and king of the Boneheads, Ryan Howard, and joining us this evening, we've got the co-hosts of the Dungeon Jedi Masters podcast, Dungeon Jedi Masters. One of them is one of my co-stars over in Deadlands The Hellgate Trilogy, so ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let me reintroduce to you guys Todd Moonbounce and Tegan. Guys, welcome to Rollin' Bones.
Hello, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having us, man.
Glad to be here.
Oh, no problem at all. For anyone who is joining us from the other stream that was just a complete technological train wreck, we are getting back on track here. So we're not going to beat around the bush or anything like that. We're just going to kind of get straight into this. Got these intro questions I ask everyone. For the interest of time, I'm going to cut it down a little bit, though. So, guys, let's begin at the beginning. How did you get into RPGs?
Yeah, so for me, it was pretty random. I think it was I think Stranger Things was kind of the kicker for me. A little bit interested in that, and I just started kind of looking things up. And first one I came across was old Star Wars D6, West End's games version of that. There's like the Star Wars role-playing game, updated, expanded, whatever. It's like a fan, I think, expanded of that version. But went to my brothers, said, hey, we should check this out and play, and never got around to that, but just kind of got sucked into the hobby. And my first experience was a traditional 5e game, and then looked around for something in person locally, and actually found a game that Tegan was running that happened to be Star Wars 5e, and pretty much the rest is history from there.
Definitely, and I got into it about 10 years ago in college. One of my buddies was running a 3-5 game, and I decided to give it a shot. I was right when Skyrim came out, so he knew I played Skyrim and decided to kind of bring me into tabletop too. So I played that. I played a little Pathfinder 5 or 1E. Then took probably about a 5-6 year break in between college and graduation and all that. And then picked back up a couple years ago with 5E and then eventually Star Wars 5E.
Awesome. And then just kind of the favorite game systems that you guys have played in over the years. What would those be for you? What are some of the favorite systems you played?
For me, obviously Star Wars 5e is going to be up there. My newest one, and it's just kind of because it's that new car smell flavor of the month, but has been Savage Worlds. For me, I've been in that. Obviously, Ryan, you and I play together in Deadlands, so we have that system there, and then I run a Deadlands campaign as well. And it's a lot of fun. It's very adaptable to any setting, so you can just dive in and, if you want to do pirates, space, ancient war, etc. It has the great structure to do so. So that's probably my main one. And then otherwise, I've been looking at a lot of OSRs, old school style games as well lately. And again, those are just kind of flavors of the month. They're the latest thing, but 5e is always going to be there. The good old standby, I guess.
Awesome.
For sure, definitely Star Wars 5e is up there for me. It's one of my favorite ways to. Because a lot of people play 5e. It's kind of the good and bad of the RPG world, and getting people to play Star Wars, it's the easiest way to get them to be familiar with it and up and running, and it's a fun system in of itself too. Outside of that, though, one of my favorite adaptations to traditional 5e is Storm Chasers. It's actually developed by one of the people on the Star Wars 5e development team. A lot of fun. It adds some crunch, adds some more realistic options, and adds like a ton of cool things you can do as a martial character as well, which I thought sometimes 5e can lack a little bit. So if you've never seen it, check it out. It's just a really fun way to add a little bit more realism and complexity into a 5e game. And outside of that, I've just been loving Pathfinder 2e lately. It's probably I've not DM'd it yet myself, but that's next on my list to DM. I just played a one shot with it recently, and it's kind of reignited my love for that system.
Awesome. Awesome. And then we tend to get a lot of, great memories out of this hobby. It's, something that, for those of us who put a lot of time into it, obviously we've got some pretty good memories wrapped up with playing RPGs. So if you guys had to pick a fondest RPG memory, what would that be?
Tegan, if you got something, I got to think on it.
So this would happen recently in my traditional D&D game. It was just kind of a cool setup. Basically, it's a homebrew world that I've made, and the players had run afoul of a vampire. And basically, the whole premise is they're fighting against a demonic invasion. Initially, they were sent to kill the vampire, but they eventually needed his help. And he invited them to dinner, and they had like a fun, like a real RP session with them, kind of coming to terms with what they would be willing to do to secure the vampire's help, which kind of wound up crossing some of the alignment and some of the moral lines for some of the characters. It was just kind of fun seeing them negotiate that out and kind of have dinner with somebody they completely hated but needed in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah, as I was thinking about that, a lot of them started coming up, and I think for me, a couple quick things. Back when I was first starting to DM, I just I played a little bit and I dove in and said, all right, I'm going to start running games, and in the middle of a session. And I went right to streaming all of those as well. But I was running, and it was an individual thing for each player. There was each player was doing their own little aspect here. And in the middle of it, it was first like homebrew, if you will. I wasn't running off a module for this, and one of the players mid session messaged me and said, dude, you are amazing, this is so cool. And that was just a really nice moment like that. And then kind of tagging on that homebrew thing as well, because I have mostly ran a lot of modules to get me through a lot of my stories, but the first time I ever completely went just off the rail, didn't really have a ton planned. The players kind of did something and I adapted to that. Was one of the most fun times I had, because it was really just feeding off what the players did. And it was like a heist going into a security facility. It was a lot of fun to do that. And so that was, definitely one of the best moments there.
And I absolutely cannot cut this question. I have to know every single person who comes on the show. So this can be as philosophical or as sophomoric as you guys want to make it. But if you could put anything on a T-shirt, what would it be?
Tegan's wearing it right now.
I'd say I got the Dungeon Jedi Masters shirt going. Outside of that, that's a good question. I've never thought about that before. Todd, I'll let you go first on that.
So this one, and I know you've asked this before, Ryan, when I was watching some other things, and I guess I didn't do well enough to prepare. But the funny aspect of that is that I've hobby screen printed before. I've really loved that hobby, and then in my 9 to 5, I actually that's a big aspect of my business, promotional products and custom apparel. So. Maybe just dancing around the bush here with the question, but I put stuff on T-shirts all the time. I'll say, I don't know, because I've done so much of that. So it's a good one. Yeah, Todd Moonbounce is go. That'll be my T-shirt.
That'd be a good one.
Stick with the Star Wars theme. I love Star Destroyers, so I'd love a Star Destroyer T-shirt. That's what I'm gonna go with.
Awesome. Yeah, there have been some T-shirt worthy moments on Hellgate so far. Mostly, they call me
Yeah.
Bob.
Yes.
I think is the one that a lot of people would go crazy for. So, with that out of the way, we're here to talk about some Star Wars 5e. So, if you guys can give us a little bit of background on where did this game system come from, and I know Todd, you ran into it through Tegan, but Tegan, how did you come across Star Wars 5e for the first time?
Definitely. So I was just on I was on Reddit. I started replaying 5e probably about 6 months before that. So my friends getting me back into the hobby. And I was like, I really want to play a Star Wars game, but my friends don't didn't really want to learn anything new at that point. So I wound up doing a one shot, kind of searching just through Reddit to see kind of what other systems there would be or something easy kind of pick up for people that are familiar with 5e, and came across one of Galley's posts on Reddit and decided to give it a shot. And initially ran a one shot with my friends, but we could only meet once a month usually to play. So decided to put out a little ad. I forgot what game site I
Meetup.
did it on, but what? Oh, Meetup, yeah, Meetup.
Yeah.
And we met at a game store in our area, and just kind of all kind of new people to me, and luckily we got a good crew for it.
Yeah, it was a great time. As Tinka said, that was my very first in-person game with TTRPGs. So I had no idea what to expect. I just happened to take a chance on, hey, Star Wars RPG sounds cool. I knew a little bit of 5e, so the familiarity was there. And then I think just in preparation, like I was really into Discord as well. Then I was like, Discord's so cool. Like there's all these things. Where can I, and I happened to find out, and there was, and it was, I think even back then it was pretty young, definitely compared to what it is today, at least. And just dove in, and at first was one of those new people to ask questions about things, and then with my background, with design background, I kind of got in with helping with uh, some of the print material and or at least the rule books and stuff that they put out, and kind of worked in. And then yeah, I mean, that was that. Tegan eventually came in. He's amazing with enemy and monster creation, and kind of came in to join the mod team, if you will, dev team of Star Wars 5e. So yeah.
Gotcha. Now, obviously, to do this amount of work on a book like this, you have to be tremendous Star Wars fans. So I just have to know, where are kind of your main touchstones of Star Wars fandom? Like, is it purely the movies? Is it some of the TV shows, the video games? Where do you guys come at your Star Wars fandom from primarily?
Definitely. For me, it's Legends. I wish I was upstairs in my office. I've got like my Star Wars bookcase. I love the old books. I think I've read like 90% of the old books. There's like hundreds of them. Like there's just so many cool stories there, and that's kind of how I came at my DMing and how Star Wars 5e, just kind of pulling cool, random Star Wars universe facts and kind of making a story around them. If you guys haven't checked out, anybody watch the stream, the Legends books, there's some really cool ones, some new good canon ones too as well. But Legends is definitely where my heart's at. And that's definitely where I love the movies, but if I had to pick between the two, I'd pick a lot of those old books ahead of the movies.
And a quick plug on that topic: our next episode of the DJM podcast will be all about the books of Star Wars. So keep an eye out for that. However, movies will probably be it for me. It just, I feel like I saw the prequels in theaters, but TNT, those reruns, constantly, they're always on. They were on this weekend, and I sat through and watched them. Just the original trilogy. There's other memories of being at family's house and it's on in the background because it's a holiday or whatever, and that stuff. And then just kind of taking in the various media that comes in, the video games. Battlefront, of course, is a classic, and having three brothers, all being very interested in that stuff, and then. So yeah, it's not as maybe fine tuned as Tegan. At least my knowledge of Star Wars, but you're definitely coming into Star Wars 5e is rooted out of just the core, the original trilogy for sure.
I'm so glad you mentioned Battlefront, because for my particular generation of Star Wars fans who kind of grew up playing Battlefront and Battlefront 2 on the PlayStation, yeah, that was a big one for me. And
Yeah.
I still
Yeah,
love
the
those
original ones. We're
games.
not talking
Oh, yeah.
the latest ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So we might have had it on, was it on GameCube? Because I think that's what we had it on. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and
And even before that, the old Pod Racer game, and yeah, not to date
Can't
myself
forget
or anything.
KOTOR and for PlayStation 1 Jedi Power Battles. If you guys ever played that one's old Phantom Menace game that came out with, it was a ridiculously hard but a ton of fun. You got to play through the scenes of the Phantom Menace with different characters.
Nice.
Yeah, and then I've made no small secret when I've talked about Star Wars on here that I love the Jedi Academy games, though that are the Jedi Knight games, including Jedi Academy. Kyle Katarn is one of my absolute favorite extended universe characters.
Sure.
So as we've mentioned, we've mentioned a couple of the Star Wars games before. This is not the first time that D&D and Star Wars have collided and even shared mechanics, going all the way back to Wizards of the Coast when they did their basically, hack of 3E for Star Wars, and then like the hack of 3.5 that was Saga Edition, one of the most beloved Star Wars games out there. There is a history of mixing the rules of D&D into Star Wars. KOTOR is another good example of this. So how do you guys feel that 5e fits with the world of Star Wars? And what is it about 5e that kind of, uniquely suits it to hold this particular franchise and help players and GMs kind of stay true to it?
For me, just my short side of that question is that 5e isn't necessarily, the perfect or the right system for Star Wars. For me, it's a little more that it's a system that is so familiar with players that it gets them to jump into a Star Wars, role-playing game. Not to say that, it doesn't fit in certain aspects, but that's how I would look at it. I think that 5e obviously is probably, the most popular tabletop out there. And so if you're kind of how, Tegan and I got into it, we wanted to play Star Wars, and 5e was the familiar one. And so that got into it. Tegan, your side of the question, I know you're so much more into the mechanics and stuff.
Definitely, and as you mentioned, 5e is like the biggest game out there. That's what everybody plays, everybody knows. The nice thing, especially with the Star Wars 5e system, because 5e kind of gives some people familiarity enough to go into Star Wars 5e. But like so many changes are in the system, it's almost like its own system. It's definitely like I would say it's almost completely, not completely different than 5e, but there's enough. It has the same bare bones, the same structure that's familiar to people that play 5e, but they've customized and added so many cool features in that it does feel a little bit more Star Warsy and just really can kind of capture the universe while still having that familiar background. People are willing to kind of take the branch and learn some new things as they're going through with it.
Yeah, it's not simply just weapons become Star Wars weapons or whatever. As Tegan mentioned, there's a lot of beyond reskinning even within the mechanics. The spell casting, which is power casting in Star Wars 5e, force or tech powers. So the two there. So yeah, there's definitely within Star Wars 5e a lot of things that have been updated so that it does better fit the setting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's one thing to take a look at 5e, and you can see how a Jedi and a Paladin would be very similar, just kind of at a very kind of surface level understanding of the two archetypes. But then you get into the depths of what is a Jedi, the divisions amongst the Jedi of, there's the Guardians, the Consulars, the Sentinels. and having to then kind of suss those out in their own classes. You can see where this becomes very granular, and like Tegan says, needs to in many ways evolve into its own system. So one thing I'll say in kind of my brief exposure to this, it looks like the system has done a good job of taking the bones of 5e and arranging them in such a way to make a good Star Wars game. What's been kind of your experience in seeing the differences between how 5e plays and how this system plays?
Definitely. So the biggest one, and this is kind of the easiest one most DMs will kind of know it immediately after running Star Wars 5e. Your players have a lot more options, which as a player is a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool things you can do with different abilities, items, just so many different things that you can bring to the table as a player. But as a DM, you'll find that with so many options and so many more enhanced abilities compared to regular 5e, that they're going to be stronger, which will make a little extra challenge for DMing. Uh, that'd be like my biggest overall kind of like thing to say for the system. There's just so much like so many different kind of customization options and flexibility and just things that you can do between every class having their own style of invocations where they can kind of go through a level two and kind of pick some different customization options to all the different items, the fighting styles, the fighting masteries. There's just so much you can do to really make your PC feel like its own or kind of build a world of your own with it. So it's just really flexibility would be the big core difference in my view.
Yeah, I think when we've been in it so long that we've seen it evolve ourselves a lot, and kind of seen some of those significant changes. Where it was a lot closer to I'd say traditional 5e, and then it started just because I think out of necessity to make sure it fit the setting better. Some of these big changes came through, and it was just design choices by Galley and the rest of the team to just give those options to make it feel more like a Star Wars game, because that's definitely was one of the big challenges to allow it to do so. And then kind of going a step further of that is, and I think we have to do that with any tabletop game, but a lightsaber should cut down a person in one swing. Well, that's not realistic in a game. You have to have balance to that, so that the lightsaber, the Jedi, isn't always just destroying everyone, while the other the scoundrel is having to empty his blaster out to do anything. So just a lot of those little aspects that you have to pay attention to as well.
Absolutely. Now, one thing that I've talked a lot about in my exploration of RPGs that are not strictly fantasy, I find that a lot of people get really tripped up in kind of deprogramming fantasy role-playing from themselves when they head into other settings. Deadlands is a good example of this. A lot of times people will try to approach it as D&D with six guns, and Star Wars, a lot of people will approach it as D&D with lightsabers. As game masters, how do you set up the adventure so that people are forced to think about things through more of a Star Wars lens than a D&D lens? Is that something you think about, focus on? How have you guys kind of run into that, or how do you deal with that tendency amongst players?
I think Star Wars has a little bit of an advantage with this one because more people I feel like are familiar with the Star Wars universe than they are D&D universe.
Mhm.
So they kind of are almost already coming thinking about the movies, the shows, and kind of how they want their PC to fit into that world. So I think it kind of gives you a freebie on that one. But definitely, you kind of stuff to kind of play. The way I do is just playing into the Star Wars tropes. So you know, have the different sides of the Force, the big villain that they're going up against insurmountable odds, and just really kind of playing into the Star Wars westerny kind of high fantasy feel, and just kind of keeping that in there. But I think the nice part is the players are ready to. They know the theme and are ready to buy into it already.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went into Star Wars 5e, and I actually I started learning that game more than I knew 5e. So I was, instead of translating from 5e to Star Wars 5e, I was going the other way around when I would play traditional. But because I was so familiar to Star Wars that it just allowed me to dive into that. And then it became, those mechanics were Star Wars mechanics. And I think, as Tegan said, absolutely, people know Star Wars pretty well. I've had, I used to run a ton of one shots, up to 4 times a month. I peeled back just with so many other projects, but most of those players were all very familiar with Star Wars. They were coming from within the Star Wars 5e community. But I had one or two that, maybe seen the movies and, some light familiarity, but they still picked it up. They knew the concepts, as Tegan mentioned, those tropes and space western, and you guys are doing this and this, and you just, instead of a dagger, like a whatever the 5e version is, it's a lightsaber or something else. And I think it translates pretty well, to switch from one to the other. Yeah.
Gotcha. Now, one issue that comes up a lot in Star Wars role-playing in particular, and this comes a lot from the West End games Star Wars, how does 5e Star Wars address the Jedi are too powerful or Jedi take too much of the spotlight, to where in some systems people will say you need all Jedi in your party or no Jedi? How do you feel that Star Wars 5e kind of comes at that problem of just kind of the gap in power and gap in ability between Jedi and non-Jedi player characters?
Yeah, I think it does it very well. I think it pulls the Jedi into a class, and so the classes are mostly all balanced with each other. We have our rogue version, which is the operative, and we have a barbarian version, which is called a berserker, and those are non-force casting classes. And then you have, as you mentioned, Ryan, the guardian, consular, and sentinel. Those are the force casting, so those would be your Jedi. Those are, making those classes is really going to be where your balance comes from between each other. And then for the ones that do spell casting, power casting in Star Wars 5e, those are going to be just similar to a casting class in 5e. So that's where the balance comes from. And then the other big part of that is just the suspension of belief, I guess, as I mentioned earlier. You need to bring that in and say, okay, I'm not going to be just, force pushing someone, off the wall or whatever. So you have to kind of keep that stuff in mind when you do go into it as well. So, Tegan?
Yeah. And one of the nice things they did too, I think some of the other systems really didn't do this before. I know Saga didn't. I didn't play much Destiny, but I don't think they did as well. But they really made the tech casters their own. Like, they made people that use like the gadgets and things like that their own casting style. So they kind of play like a regular caster, and it really gives them some added power. So there's always like kind of the disparity between the casters and the marshals, which on the other side too, Star Wars 5e's done a great job of buffing up the marshals too, so they can compete even at the higher levels. But they really gave the tech casters some good options just so they stand on par with the Jedi and give them some cool features too that can really kind of, depending on how your DM runs the campaign, because the casters get their powers back in a short rest. So they can really go all Nova, like warlocks, in different fights, and can really kind of just so they can keep recharging and going where the Jedi may need some rest to keep going.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's always interesting to see how that's addressed, because it's funny that you mentioned Force and Destiny, because I feel like the way that Fantasy Flight kind of took on this problem of all Jedi or no Jedi, really they spun it off into its own book. I've got problems with, in order to play a complete Star Wars game, you have to buy 3 $50 books. That's a lot. That's a lot to ask of players and GMs. But
on top of the special dice too.
Yeah, on top of the special dice. But I really feel like they dropped the ball on that one, kind of basically shunting them off into their own book and saying, you're not going to be, you have to go out of your way to incorporate this into your games. Because there's always going to be someone who wants to play a Jedi. That's what we all kind of fantasize about from Star Wars. You do have your players who want to be Boba Fett or Han Solo, but for a lot of people, the fun is embodying a Jedi and being able to use those Force powers and swing a lightsaber. And
Definitely.
if a Star Wars game is not able to produce that, then it's not doing Star Wars well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of in my campaigns, my one shots, with the one shots especially, they're never a specific era. Occasionally, I would do something specific, like we're Rebel era, so for that, traditionally no Jedi. But even then, it's a free for all, and it's whatever you want. And so the party makeup is so wide. You get scoundrels, you get the Jedi, you get the whatever, and it's so much fun to see that, and the system does such a good job to allow that to happen. The Jedi is not running the show. The other classes have their moments as well.
Definitely, and there's probably a little suspension of disbelief on that one because with the Force users not dominating, but it plays balanced. Nobody really outshines another. You can definitely, with this system, since there's so much flexibility, you can build a pretty OP character if you go at it that way. But that's more due to your design, not the classes themselves. So there's really nothing that's going to just inherently offset the class balance.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, something that's often overlooked about Star Wars, but is a key component, ship combat. How is ship combat handled in Star Wars 5e, and do you feel like ship combat is fleshed out enough to where it's mechanically fulfilling, but not so fleshed out that it becomes tiresome?
Yeah, so that's that's maybe a touchy subject, or was. They're going through the second iteration of the Starship rules. They did a massive rewrite. The first version was decent. It kind of did its job, but it was too much of a departure from the ground game, as we call it. So they rewrote them to bring back the traditional 6 ability scores that you do have as a PC. So your Starship is based off that, and really just tried to bring that together. But for the longest time, I didn't really look at them because there was a lot to them. But recently, Tegan and I, we dove into it and kind of being forced to do so. And once you get in there, basically, there's a ton of customization for your Starship. And I think there's a little bit of choice paralysis where you go into it. And one of the biggest things that we hear DMs say is, or even players, there's just too much stuff here. Like, this is overwhelming. I don't want to do this. And if you can take the time to get everything set up and ready to go, then once you're actually in the moment of space combat, it's actually pretty fun and pretty enjoyable. So, and for what it is, it's pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The new system, I feel like it's way better than the old one. Uh, it's a lot of fun. It can almost be a game in and of itself, which is a good and bad thing sometimes, because there's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of cool things you can do with it, but unless you're going to be running space combat like pretty frequently, sometimes it can be hard for players to keep up with kind of what they can do, what the abilities are, what the rules are for space, which can be a challenge of itself sometimes. But definitely, there's I'm excited to see somebody run like a just straight space campaign because with the new rules especially, it can easily be done and be a fun way to do a kind of like if you did a Rogue Squadron dogfighter game, that could be a fun way to bring that to tabletop.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a expansion of 5e called Spaceships and Star Worms that I love. It's a sci-fi version of 5e. It has very extensive Starship rules as well, and it's a pretty good system. Personally, I've kind of come around to this line of thought that in role-playing games, the focus is always more on narrative. It's always more like story-wise. What is the purpose of this particular, sequence? whether you're in a ship, whether you're in a battle on the ground, something like that. And so one system that I found interesting that was used for mass combat when I encountered it was Professor Dungeon Masters' basically advantage system for mass combat, where each thing that gives you an advantage in the battle, so numbers, superior weapons, superior training, adds a dice to your roll. You roll against your opponents and you take the highest. Could you see something like that working as a mechanic for starship combat, where advances that your particular ship has would add to something like that, and then it comes down to a dice roll? Or do you guys prefer the more fleshed out, more mechanical system where you, like you said, almost have your own game just in the starship system alone?
I could say that. So kind of all just off the cuff on that one. I would say that even though it's pretty fleshed out, I would still rather have kind of like the good bones of the system where you can kind of have some good options and choices on that side, just getting everybody familiar with it. But it definitely sounds cool with kind of the dice roll, the kind of the different advantages and things like that stacking up. But I do like kind of having like duking it out and kind of seeing how everything plays. Not real time, but in game time with that, just to kind of give that narrative some flesh.
The way, kind of to that point for myself, for me, space encounters are transition points, transition moments, going from planet A to B. Maybe a pirate comes in to try and hijack you. And it should be, just as in most of the movies, it should be fast, quick, and, whatnot. So the existing rules were too clunky for me, for my specific purpose. And so I've tried to come up with a little more narrative stuff. But what I found is that you do kind of, once you get in there, you do end up longing for a little bit more, as Tegan just mentioned, some of the choices and the options. Yeah. And it's a tough balance of like, all right, when do you go too far? And when do you start getting into like, all right, everyone's got to do their turn, everyone's got to do all their things, as opposed to just being real quick and fast with it. And basically two ships, either try and outfly or outshoot each other, and then you continue on with the adventures. So I think that, there could be some merit to that other, option. It's really going to come down to, just your preference at the table. But certainly the rules as they are, I think, certainly provide a good experience.
Yeah, that's another kind of pitfall of running really any sci-fi system, because you run into this with the Star Trek RPGs as well, or any space-based sci-fi RPG that you try to run. When it comes to the ship stuff, there's always just so much more there, to where, if someone wanted to run a campaign where everyone was part of Rogue Squadron and it was purely ship-based, I could almost see that working better for them, because then they have the mechanics
right.
to really focus in on that space battle. But for the most part, I think a lot of groups do tend to view space battles the way that Todd mentioned them, in that they're transitional. It's like travel time in a fantasy RPG. Some people want to role play it and want to get really nitty gritty, but for the most part, people are just gonna, here's your Indiana Jones map with the red line.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's, whatever your preference is at your table, how you want to run that. And as I think with this rule set, as the DM, if you can get in there and get through it, and it just depends. Work with your players if they're willing to step in and help out with that process. You're either gonna have a DM that does it all, players that help out, or you kind of skip over it. I think this is going to be what you're going to see with it. But once you get past the setup, then I think it is where then you can start having fun with it and move along. You don't have to worry about building your ship. Like that's, there's so much options, which is great, but it can, cause some hesitation.
I can definitely drag it down a bit if there's too many decisions for the group.
Yeah. Now, moving away from the mechanics a little bit and talking, about just kind of the usability of this system, due to the nature of this product, in that it is a fan product, it's a hack of 5e using another property. All of these resources are available to people online for free. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Yep.
Great
That's
website.
w5e.com, and it is all there.
Gotcha. Yeah, and this website really does have it all. It's very clean. It's very nicely organized. There's a couple different books available: the PHB, Scum and Villainy, Starships
VR
the
Monster
Galaxy,
Manual. Yep.
and Wretched Hives. Now, how how would one, if they felt so inclined, go about supporting the creators who are working hard on doing this? Is there some kind of crowdfunding or a Patreon type setup or something like that where people can contribute to the individuals who are putting their time and effort into making this thing a reality?
Yeah, so really, I mean, one of the biggest things is just kind of joining the community and you know contributing in that way. I mean, that's how Tegan and I got involved. We just picked up a project. A lot of times people come in and says, "Is this certain species available?" And usually the response is, "It's not." So go ahead and make it. Kind of dive in, figure that out, and then start contributing to the system as well. So I think that's one of the big ways to kind of help to support it. Yeah.
For sure. I'd say that's probably the biggest is being willing to jump in and create different content. Because with this being a Star Wars property, the creator Galley is not trying to earn a profit off of this or anything like that. So he's just trying to get more fun Star Wars stuff out there. So going in, creating some stuff, being a good member of the community is probably the best way you can contribute.
Awesome. Cool. So, as far as like content out there of like actual play and stuff like that, who all is out there kind of, doing that side of things besides just you guys?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen quite a bit of it. Out there of just various people within the community. There are occasional streams that pop up, but try and keep an eye on those. Just being involved with the game. I can't think of any specific off the top of my head, but it's out there. Definitely see him on Twitch and etc.
Definitely, I'm blanking on who's doing or kind of ones that are kind of off the top of my mind, but I've definitely seen some out there. Every now and then they'll either post in the Discord or on the Reddit thread, and it's kind of cool seeing all those creators kind of throw it into the system.
Now this is kind of more of a personal question from my end, just because I'm obsessed with miniatures and terrain and stuff like that. But when it comes to running an in-person game in this system, what kind of resources are you guys using for miniatures, terrain, things like that? Is that something that makes its way into your in-person games, or
Yeah,
how have
you,
you found
you're
to work around that?
this guy's got quite a collection.
I need to start using it again. I haven't used it in a year and a half now, but yeah, I spent probably too much money on that. But so yeah, just buying different figures. If you're looking for DMs, like looking for a somewhat inexpensive way to get some great figures, the what is it called? The Imperial Assault games, I think Imperial Assault, Southern Assault games. They give you a lot of great figures. If you're somebody that likes to paint, you can paint them. They can really do well with it. I bought some specific ones off Mini Mart before too, so I can get some cool colored ones of different characters or designs that I really wanted to have. And yeah, I really need to start using them, but I have a ton of them in a box with just different designs from different Force users, droids, tons of stormtroopers, and just different things you can kind of adapt to your game and throw in there and kind of give that Star Wars feel for in person.
Yeah, I was, as a player in that first game in person seems so long ago. Yeah, I grabbed a mini. I played a Duros. No, I played a Chiss. Sorry, we had a Duros as well. But so I just grabbed, like you said, I think it was eBay or something like that. Found some old minis that I think were for one of the older Star Wars games as well. But yeah, I mean, Tegan always had, he had the AT walkers. I mean, just everything. It was so cool for that. Terrain wise, there wasn't really much there, just kind of tiles, get your dry erase markers, things like that. That worked fine. I mean, outside of Star Wars 5e and a couple of in-person games I've ran, that's generally what I do as well. Just your basic map with some dry erase, but stuff works. But yeah, there's definitely mini resources out there at least.
For sure.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, miniatures would be the big thing, and obviously Imperial Assault has done a great job, making sure that stormtroopers, rebel troops, clones, droids, things like that are available. I have noticed if you try to go to any of the major make your own miniatures, if you're not playing a Jedi, it's a little bit difficult to get something that has that authentic Star Wars feel. So maybe that's an unexplored market that Hero Forge, Eldritch Foundry, all those places can start kind of working on.
Now, there's, of course, not to go down that rabbit hole, but certain reasons why
Yes.
They're not doing that. But
Yeah.
on that topic, if you just kind of do some searching through those companies, there are some amazing workarounds that people have done.
Definitely.
I've looked up some of the well-known species and surprised how well people have made some things, including a nightmarish B1 battle droid. So it's been done. It's pretty funny looking.
Yeah, and I mean, Eldritch Foundry, I think they did it first. They've got some not really Mandalorian armor that you can put on your characters there. I think that came out right around the time the Mandalorian dropped. So for anyone who's playing that Boba Fett type, or playing a Mando, if your GM is that generous with you,
it's especially when Mandalorian came out, that was one of our top requests was, how do I build a Mandalorian? How do I build a Mandalorian? So yeah,
They built the macro for it. It was so common.
yeah, it's just a quick command. Here you go. So
yeah, because that's one of those. You talk about an overpowered option for playing a Mandalorian in one of these RPGs is something that a lot of people have pursued, and it's something that there has to be some kind of barrier to entry to get to. I think in Star Wars lore, with the idea of the foundlings and stuff like that, you have to earn your place in one of the clans. So having that be almost like a name level thing from early D&D is an interesting concept that a lot of people have played with. But yeah, that's one of the major challenges.
As we talked about with the Jedi as well, really, if you want to be a Mandalorian in Star Wars 5e, I think the Scout class, which is essentially the Tegan, help me out here.
Ranger.
Ranger? Yeah, it's like a Ranger, but Scout's going to be one of your initial classes that you'll go with for a Mandalorian, and then just build out from there. So it just goes back to that. The classes are balanced amongst each other, and so you can do that. And you're not, just because the movie says you should be, overpowerful, you have to bring that in to allow for a fun game for everyone.
Yeah, and ultimately, an RPG is an adventure of going from you're barely able to survive to being overpowered. So a lot of people think about just wanting to skip that journey and be right at that kind of top point. But one of the beautiful things about RPGs is that journey to where you're an unbeatable world breaker.
Right.
And you'll definitely get there with Star Wars 5e, probably earlier than you expect, too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's only in these RPGs that people find out, oh wait, stormtroopers actually can shoot things. You specifically.
Not with my dice luck as a GM, but yeah.
I have the complete opposite. As a DM, I roll really well. As a player, I roll like shit. Like, crit as a DM most nights, but as a player, like it'll be rare if I do.
I found weirdly that it varies on like virtual tabletops. When I'm playing in person, it's kind of like a crapshoot whether or not I'm going to roll well. But I found that on Roll20, both as a player and a GM, I don't roll very well. But on Foundry, as you guys have probably seen on Hellgate, I don't know what it is. I don't know what the difference is. It's probably just my perception of things, but it seems like I roll way better on Foundry than I do anywhere else, and I don't know why. It's probably just
Yeah,
my
I've got a
superstition.
player that, I mean, because he's in both a Deadlands and a Star Wars 5e game with me, and it's just specifically him. His dice rolls are insane. I mean, they're just, you know, I gotta check a system for cheat codes or something. But yeah,
Even rolled off D&D Beyond last week, and he was rolling pretty well.
yeah, yep.
Now I've not used much of D&D Beyond as like a VTT or anything like that. Now that does actually bring up an interesting question. How difficult is it to kind of make D&D Beyond work with these homebrew rules? Is there a lot of like work and support
You
going
don't
into
really.
you
There's
don't?
no
Okay.
Yeah,
support.
you can't.
Yeah, there's no
D&D
support there.
Beyond.
That's not going to happen. We get even today there was somebody asking about that. You know, how do I do D&D Beyond for this? And there is a character creator built into the website, Star Wars 5e, sw5e.com. So it's a little similar. I wouldn't even say it's similar, but it basically does that process. Is you go in and you build your character step by step. And then from there, there's options to export that into the proper formats to Foundry and Roll20. So if you're going to continue on to, and I think there's also one just to go straight to PDF, so you can have your traditional paper character sheet and it spits it out. So those systems are there. They're great to use, for that reasoning. And then kind of touching on Foundry. Just because versus Roll20, because there is a dedicated development team for that. But they've created a compendium for all the content. So you get into Foundry and it's literally just drag and drop. Your character, is super easy to create. So Foundry's been super, super friendly to the system as well, given that there's a dedicated team to just create content for it, character sheets, etc., to make sure the game functions very well in the system. In the virtual tabletop.
Awesome. Yeah, because I played a very lightly modded version of 5e to run Dark Sun, and my players who wanted to use D&D Beyond ran into so many issues with the kind of homebrew classes that we had, or even just the mild changes to some of the classes that were out there. I found that if you are playing any kind of modified version of 5e or anything that's a hack of 5e, you basically have to abandon D&D Beyond and just use something else.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So, this has been a great conversation. It's really interesting to talk about fan projects like this and the amount of time that has to go into basically developing a new game for, again, nothing, because it's a fan project. It's just for the enjoyment of the people who want to play a Star Wars game. So the fact that you guys and the creators of the game have put your time and energy into creating this and talking about it, and just creating all these resources for people to use. It really is an amazing thing in this hobby of extremely creative people. So hats off to you guys for doing some of this work here to make this thing a reality.
Yeah, and a big shout out, of course, to the Senate himself, Gallifile, who is the man that got it all going. I forget how long we've had him on our podcast a couple times to kind of talk about that history. Where he started that and just got it up and running. And then eventually it hit a point, shortly after Tegan and I joined the community as well, as the community, kind of got that, those additional team members, I guess, of the development team, and it just blew up, and then it took off, and he still spearheads everything and keeps it on track. But yeah, from what it used to be, it's a pretty cool project to see, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Galley's put so much work into it, and yeah, we came on. Scott and I started playing before the website, back when like every other month it felt like the book would change and new things would come out for it. Yeah, it's kind of crazy to see it go from like the book you had to print off yourself with just kind of things that may be out of date already to the new website where everything's so easy to find and just so many cool things along with it. And just yeah, the team's really blossomed and kind of grown over the last year, especially.
Awesome. So when it comes to Dungeon Jedi Masters itself, what do you guys usually talk about on your show? What kind of topics are you usually discussing in relation to this game?
Yeah, so DJM started as a podcast to talk about the game. I mean, it was kind of a how-to mechanics podcast. First episode was what's new and different in Star Wars 5e. So we talk about those specific differences from traditional 5e, and then just whatever comes up. The first year was a lot of specifics about the mechanics. So we did spotlights on each class individually. We talk about a lot of the new things like the casting, the power casting, force and tech powers, things like that. And then we've sprinkled in there in this last year as well, where we've covered a lot of that stuff, so you don't need to hit it again. And we expanded into DMing. It's a little bit more of a DM podcast now, I'd say, DM tips and things like that, and some fun stuff too. Like I mentioned, our next episode is going to be talking about Star Wars books. So we expand even into the Star Wars stuff as well. So, Tegan, anything else on that initially?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of expanded from the mechanics to some DM tips and just some cool things. There's a lot of differences or small differences with the system that can add up, and just really highlighting those for new DMs or even just DM switching into running the Star Wars system, just to give them a little bit of a heads up on what we experience, so they don't have to kind of stumble across on their own.
One thing that I think you guys should do at some point on the show, if you haven't done so already, you probably have thought of this yourselves, or maybe are even going to have this conversation when talking about the books. One thing that I think helps a lot of people in running games in established franchises is finding times where there's a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of big gaps in known continuity, where they're not going to be stumbling over or feeling inferior to established characters. So identifying those spots kind of in the Star Wars canon, I think, is a valuable resource. So, I mean, if you guys have done that, awesome. If not, I think that's something that a lot of prospective Star Wars DMs would be interested to hear about.
I'm pretty sure we did that with the setting episode. We had I think, first season on that one. Yeah, because there's some great dead areas of Star Wars where there's just no, even legends and canon, there's just nothing written in. Like the game that Todd played in my first two games were hosted in an era, was it 1,000 years or 2,000 or 2,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, where there's literally nothing written. So the Sith are still around. There's still a lot of dark siders running around. There has been the rule of two. You can give some really just kind of build your own narrative. The Republic has to be there because that's a Star Wars kind of corner. But outside of that, everything else can be your own galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's real easy to just, I mean, even then, if you want to just, you can really run it off the rails. And I think that's a conversation, you just have with your table and say, we are going to be set here in the Rebel era. That's going to be our starting point, but we're going off the rails here wild. The Jedi are show back up, this and that and whatever. So that's another thing we do talk about. We definitely have touched on, where are those gaps in history, but, certainly don't hesitate to just kind of make it your own.
Mm-hmm. If I ever got the chance to run a full-on Star Wars campaign, I know there's already been like a book and stuff written about this particular era, but I think what I would do is set the campaign during the Outbound Flight program and it would literally just be, you guys are people the Republic put on this ship. You're going into the unknown regions. Joris is there. You're gonna run into the Chiss for the first time, but you guys are on outbound flight. You know, Republic, Clone Wars era. Let's see what's out there in the black.
That'd be a fun campaign. You get some good Jedi they can throw in there.
Mm-hmm.
Got Joris being crazy.
Oh,
You can go with some good stuff with that. You got the Chiss and all their isolationism. That'd be a fun one to go with.
Oh, yeah. And I've not read, I know it's a Timothy Zahn book. I should read it at some point. I've read the Thrawn trilogy. I've not read that Outbound Flight book, but I want to.
Highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites. It's actually, I like it a little bit better than the overall Thrawn trilogy. It's really good. Definitely worth a read.
Gotcha.
Joris is really interesting to read in that book, so I definitely recommend it.
Awesome. So as we're wrapping up here, I want to give you guys the chance to, plug anything you want to plug. Obviously, tell people where they can find you. So the floor is yours. Just kind of let everyone know where they can get more of this.
Absolutely. So first off, thank you so much for having us on, Ryan. This is great. And really, easiest is just go to dungeonjedimasters.com. That will have access to all of our content. So we do a podcast that is bi-weekly. As we mentioned, we talk about mechanics within the game and other topics, DM related, and things like that. We have a YouTube channel, which right now is most of our VODs of our actual plays. But we do have a lot of how-to content on there to help out as you are, building a character in Foundry VTT, for example, things like that. So we have a YouTube, Twitch channel. Most of it's all on my Twitch channel at Todd Moonbounce, and that's where we do our live plays, where we run our actual campaigns. I have a Living Force, which runs bi-weekly Sundays, and Tegan runs Hunted, which is bi-weekly Tuesdays. So we have those on there. We have an Instagram account, which is all sorts of little NPCs and custom items and roll tables and little just fun things there, which is super fun to put together, resources for the game. You can reach us at Twitter at Dungeon Jedi Masters, MSTRS. Not enough characters that Twitter allows for our long name there, but I'm sure if you just look us up straight, you'll find us there. And what else do we have? I think
definitely don't forget our Patreon on that side too.
Mention the Patreon.
Cool thing we're doing.
Sorry,
go ahead, man.
Sorry. Go ahead.
One thing we're doing this year too, which is kind of a fun thing, we post different adventures and encounters. We do that every month. Something new will be posted on that side, including a freebie. But this year we actually are posting a campaign that a DM could just roll out and play with his table. So I think it would be next week. I'm not sure when this goes completely live, but next week we'll be launching the fifth adventure. Yeah, the fifth adventure in our new kind of just Dungeon Jedi Masters campaign. So you can kind of pick it up and work it in with your players and kind of have a ready to go campaign that you don't have to tweak too much.
Yeah, definitely a great one there. It's a plot point concept. So once it's all said and done, there's a beginning and an end, and then those middle pieces you can actually put in however you want. We also do custom encounters every other month as well for Patreon members. And our Patreon essentially goes to support our content, our hosting for our podcast and other things like that. And, we treat the content as just basically a thank you to those people that support us, in that content or, in the other content that we create. So, I think that is everything. As I said, DungeonJediMasters.com is going to be your best bet. Just get access to everything.
Awesome. Well, guys, that is going to do it for tonight's episode of Rollin' Bones. Thank you guys so much for joining me this evening. Thank you for bearing with me through the hiccups of getting the show back up and running after our vacation here. Just to let you guys know what's coming up, this week and next week. Obviously, You'll be able to catch Todd and I on Wednesday over at Valor Studios for Deadlands: The Hellgate trilogy. We're coming back this week. Clay's coming out of prison, so we'll see what happens there and how everyone in town views Clay now that he's done some hard time for murdering someone in cold blood. Really interested to see how that turns out. But next week, we'll be doing 2 reviews in one episode, 2 zines that recently showed up here. So I'll be reviewing Rocket to Russia by John Hambone Maguire, and I'll also be reviewing Phylactery Issue 3 by Levi Combs. We're going to do both of those in one because they're short, and I love both those guys. They've been on the show a couple times each, so that's what we'll be doing next week. But until then, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I am so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.
Force be with you.